The moment I stood up at my own wedding reception, I saw my father's smug expression transform into shock. He'd spent years dismissing me as his disappointing daughter, but in 30 seconds, I was about to become his boss. I always dreamed my wedding day would be perfect. Instead, it became the day I finally showed my family who I really was. But to understand what happened at that reception, you need to know how I got there. My name is Emma Chen, and I grew up in the shadow of my father's expectations. Harrison Chen wasn't just a successful businessman, he was a titan of the industry who had built Chen Technologies from nothing into a multi-million-dollar empire. Every dinner conversation revolved around business strategies, market expansions, and the legacy he was building, a legacy I was apparently never good enough to be part of. "Business is in our blood," he would say, looking proudly at my older brother Marcus. Well, most of our blood. That last part was always directed at me, along with a disapproving glance that made me feel about 2 inches tall. While Marcus followed perfectly in our father's footsteps, Wharton Business School, MBA, fast track to executive positions, I chose a different path, computer engineering. My father's voice dripped with disdain when I announced my college major. "Engineers work for people like us, Emma, they don't lead companies." But I saw something he didn't. While he was focused on old-school business models and traditional corporate structures, I recognized that the future belonged to those who could build it, line by code line. I graduated at the top of my class, but my father didn't attend the ceremony. He was too busy attending Marcus's MBA graduation that same weekend, an actual achievement, he called it. For 3 years after college, I worked at various tech startups, learning everything I could about both the technical and business sides of the industry. My father saw it as aimless drifting. "When are you going to get a real job?" he would ask at every family gathering. Marcus is already a vice president at Chen Technologies. What he didn't know was that I was building something that would change everything. It started in my tiny apartment's spare bedroom, a revolutionary cybersecurity system that could adapt and evolve in real time to counter new threats. While Marcus was attending board meetings and playing golf with executives, I was coding until 3 a.m. Fueled by coffee and determination. The first version of my security software caught the attention of a small venture capital firm. Their initial investment allowed me to hire 2 other engineers and rent a small office space. My mother, during one of her rare moments away from my father's influence, secretly helped me furnish it. "I don't understand what you're building," she admitted as we assembled cheap desks from IKEA. "Yeah, but I've never seen you so passionate about anything." The next 2 years were a blur of coding, pitching to investors, and slowly building my company, Secure Core Technologies. We won our first major contract with a mid-sized bank, then another, then a government agency quietly reached out about using our software. I kept my success quiet at family dinners. I still played the role of the underachieving daughter. When my father bragged about Marcus's latest accomplishment, I would smile and push food around my plate. When relatives asked about my little computer job, I gave vague answers about doing okay. Then I met David. He was different from anyone I'd ever known, a brilliant architect who saw the world in terms of possibilities rather than limitations. He didn't care about my family's money or status. In fact, the first time we met, he had no idea who the Chens were. "You seem surprised," I said when he finally found out about my family. "I am," he admitted. "You're nothing like what I'd expect from a wealthy family's daughter. You're real." We fell in love over late-night conversations about design principles, technological innovation, and our dreams for the future. When he proposed a year later, I didn't hesitate to say yes. My father, of course, had opinions about that too. "An architect?" he scoffed during dinner. "Couldn't you at least find someone in finance or business? Someone with real potential?" I gripped my fork tightly. "David is incredibly successful. His firm just won the contract for the new downtown development project. A glorified construction worker." My father waved dismissively. "At least Marcus's wife comes from a good family. Her father's company is listed on the NYSE." I looked at Marcus's wife, Catherine, who sat there with her perfect makeup and society smile, and felt a wave of pity. She was exactly what our father wanted, a proper corporate wife who attended charity galas and knew which wines to serve at dinner parties. The wedding planning became a battlefield. My father insisted on turning it into a networking event, inviting business associates and potential clients. My mother tried to mediate but ultimately deferred to him, as she always did. Even Marcus pulled me aside one day at the office. "Just let Dad have his way," he advised. "You know how he gets. Besides, it's not like you're paying for it." But I was. Every cent of my wedding was being paid for by Secure Core's profits. Not that anyone knew that. What they also didn't know was that Secure Core had just gone public in a quiet but incredibly successful IPO. My ownership stake was worth $89 million. And that wasn't even the biggest secret I was keeping. 3 months before the wedding, I discovered something interesting during a routine security audit. Chin Technologies, my father's precious company, had serious vulnerabilities in their cybersecurity infrastructure, the kind of vulnerabilities that my software was designed to prevent. I could have warned them. Instead, I waited and watched through my networks as multiple small breaches occurred, nothing damaging. I made sure of that, but enough to send their stock price dropping and create panic among the board members. Then, through a series of shell companies, I began buying shares, lots of shares. The week before my wedding, I owned 22% of Chin Technologies. My father had no idea that his disappointing daughter was now one of his company's largest shareholders. The wedding day arrived, sunny and perfect. The ceremony was beautiful, exactly as David and I had planned, but I knew the real show would be at the reception, when my father would give his toast. I sat at the head table, holding David's hand under the white tablecloth, watching my father stand up with his champagne glass. He was wearing his favorite Tom Ford suit, the one he saved for closing major deals. The room fell silent as he began to speak. Little did he know that in the next few minutes, his entire world was about to turn upside down. My father stood at the microphone, champagne glass glinting under the reception hall's crystal chandeliers. 200 guests watched him, expecting the usual polished performance he gave at corporate events, but I could see something different in his eyes tonight, a coldness, an edge. When Emma was born, he began, his voice carrying across the silent room. I had such high hopes. The Chin family has a legacy of excellence in business. My father built his first company from nothing. I transformed it into an empire. And my son, Marcus, he gestured to my brother, who sat smugly at his table, is carrying on that proud tradition. He paused, taking a sip of champagne. I felt David's hand tighten around mine. But Emma chose a different path. Against all our family's advice, she went into, he wrinkled his nose slightly, computer programming, a path for people who work for others, not leaders. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw David start to stand, but I squeezed his hand, holding him back. Not yet. And now she's married an architect. My father's lips curved in what might have looked like a smile to others, but I recognized it as a sneer. I suppose we should be grateful she's found someone who can at least design the buildings that real business leaders will work in. Catherine, Marcus's wife, let out a small laugh, quickly covered by her napkin. A few of my father's business associates chuckled politely. The truth is, my father continued, his voice hardening, some people just aren't meant for greatness. Emma will never amount to anything significant. She's been, and always will be, a disappointment to the Chin legacy. The room fell silent. Even those who had laughed looked uncomfortable now. My mother stared at her plate, hands twisted in her lap. Marcus couldn't quite hide his smirk. I stood up slowly, smoothing my wedding dress. Thank you for those heartfelt words, Dad. I have a few things to say too. I nodded to Michael, my chief technology officer, who had been posing as a photographer. He pressed a button on his laptop, and suddenly the large screens around the reception hall, the ones my father had insisted on having for his business presentation later, came to life. What is this? My father demanded, but his voice faltered as he saw what was displayed. On the screens were Secure Core's financial statements, stock prices, and, most importantly, my ownership stake, $89 million in my name alone. You see, Dad, while you were busy grooming Marcus to run your company, I was building my own, Secure Core Technologies. Perhaps you've heard of it? We're the ones who developed the adaptive cybersecurity system that's now used by most major banks and government agencies. My father's face had gone pale. Marcus was frantically typing on his phone, probably looking up Secure Core's public records. But that's not all, I continued, my voice steady. 3 months ago, we discovered some interesting vulnerabilities in Chin Technologies' security infrastructure, the kind that could devastate a company if exploited by the wrong people. Another nod to Michael, and new information appeared on the screens, stock purchases, board meeting minutes, ownership percentages. I could have warned you, I said, walking around the table to stand directly in front of my father. Instead, I watched your stock price drop as minor breaches occurred, and then, through various shell companies, I started buying shares. Understanding dawned in my father's eyes. No, he whispered. Yes, I smiled. As of this morning, I own 22% of Chin Technologies, and tomorrow, when the market opens, I'll own even more, because tonight several board members will announce their retirement, board members who, coincidentally, have all agreed to sell their shares to me. Marcus stood up so quickly he knocked over his champagne. You can't do this, Dad. She can't do this. Actually, I can. And I have. I turned to address the shocked guests. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to announce that effective tomorrow, Secure Core Technologies will begin a merger with Chin Technologies. We'll be implementing our superior security systems, modernizing their outdated infrastructure, and bringing the company into the 21st century. My father finally found his voice. You planned this. You planned all of this. I learned from the best. Dad, isn't this what you always taught us? Identify weaknesses, seize opportunities, never show your hand until you're ready to win. The room erupted in chaos. Business reporters who had come to cover the society wedding of the year were suddenly scrambling to report on the biggest tech merger story instead. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red, while Marcus looked like he might faint. I walked back to David, who was beaming with pride. He knew everything, of course, had known for months. Ready to face the cameras, Mr. Chen? I asked. He grinned. Lead the way, Mrs. Chen Pierce, CEO of Secure Core Technologies. The aftermath was everything I expected and more. The merger made headlines across every business publication. Chin Technology stock soared once investors learned of Secure Core's involvement. Marcus was quietly moved to a non-executive position. And my father? Well, my father had to adapt to a new reality. His first board meeting under my leadership was particularly memorable. This is the security upgrade proposal, I said, sliding documents across the table to him. I'll need your signature by the end of the day. He stared at me for a long moment, then picked up his pen. You really did it, he said quietly. You built something remarkable. Yes, I replied. I did, without your help, without your approval, and without following your path. And that's what really bothers you, isn't it? He signed the papers without responding. As he stood to leave, he paused at the door. Your mother wants you to come to dinner on Sunday. I smiled. I'll be there. And Dad? This time, I'll give the toast. 1 year later, Chin Secure Core Technologies was valued at over $3 billion. My father still sits on the board, though now he listens more than he speaks. Marcus found his own path, starting a small consulting firm. Turns out he's better at advising businesses than running them. And my mother? She finally started speaking up at family dinners. David and I bought a penthouse overlooking the city, but we kept my old apartment where I built Secure Core's first prototype. Sometimes I go there to work late at night, remembering those early days when everyone thought I was wasting my time. The media loves to call it a revenge story, how the underestimated daughter took over her father's company, but it's really about something else. It's about building something on your own terms, about proving that success doesn't have to follow someone else's blueprint. Last week, my father actually asked for my advice about a new tech investment. You see things differently, he admitted. You see the future. I looked out at the city skyline from my office, the same office that used to be his. No, Dad, I said, I don't just see the future, I build it, and that's worth more than any inheritance he could have given.